Let's move on from there, though, because talking about preparation is tremendously addictive, and it keeps us from actually looking at the guts of the activity of play and the and then several things that I want to talk about. One of them is the uncertainties that are present in the fiction itself, what a character does and does not know, what may or may not be a character's fate in the moment, what is or isn't lurking, right? I mean, again, to go to the D&D thing, a room as you enter it is full of uncertainty. What is in here? Where are the dangers? How bad are the dangers? Where are the rewards? How good are the rewards? Where are we relative to the rest of this dungeon? Are we sure? All sorts of shit, right? All sorts of uncertainties.
Mhm.
Without those uncertainties of one sort or another, no conflict will emerge. With them,
Right.
conflict will emerge. So without forcing it, without having the negative writers room where everybody's stroking their chins going, so what's going to be the conflict in this next scene? Fuck all that. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. No. None of this, what will the conflict be in the next scene? No. That's not the writers room we're talking about. We're talking about a different kind of writers room in which we are not quite writers.
Mhm.
And so with this in mind, with those uncertainties and things, then we look finally, we look at what everyone thinks is the guts of a role playing game, and it's not. They're nuts and bolts. They're not really the guts. The guts is the
Right.
change. The nuts and bolts is things like how do the procedures of speaking and instrumentation turn into changes? They can be direct, they can be indirect. If I take this many hit points, my character is dead. That's very direct. Or it can be much more subtle. Yeah, I killed the goblin that time, and that doesn't seem to change like a lot. But you know what? Relative to the entirety of my hit points through the course of this whole level up process, that moment was at least some subroutine of leveling up.
Mhm.
You see, so those are very simplistic examples, but all role playing, even the more subtle ones, even the ones that don't use that don't use numerical math as much, they're still using a math
Mhm.
to do exactly what I'm
Mm.
talking about. Even if it's the math of ordering of speaking, that's still math.
Yeah,
So, right. Mhm.
it's the exchange of semantic tokens with value.
Exactly correct. Yeah, and so or we can go over to Boolean algebra and talk about operations and set theory and stuff like that, which I love to do, but you know, we'll avoid that just for the moment. So the idea here is that if we look at this systemic stuff, then we can start saying what is or isn't good system for this. What are we looking at that just
Mhm.
led us to fuck around? And there's a good kind of fucking around, but there's the led us to do that in the negative sense, whereby that sense of energetic reincorporation, even if it's calm and slow, disappears. I have been in many game situations in which you could feel the bottom drop out
Uh-huh.
of that interaction. And we were diligently using systemic stuff, and we could feel that whatever changes were going to be eventually occurring were going to be imposed by some sort of Uber editor and not be emergent from what we said and what we did, even indirectly. If it has to go through a filter of somebody going back and making sense of it later, um, or to keep injecting things. I mean, when, as is sometimes the case, when I'm playing a character and the person GMing starts playing some kind of voice on my shoulder of, you get the impression that XYZ. Well, this guy, and then starts like feeding me, well, this guy is really on your side. Starts feeding me contextual, direction.
Yeah, well,
And stuff
that's
that's
kind
just
of
an
a show
example.
don't tell.
No, well, there's more than that. I mean, I think there's more to it than just show don't tell. We're
No,
talking about the
it's
fact that
actually
what
more
I
it
say, we're talking about the fact that in that circumstance, what I say doesn't matter. They are not trusting me to receive and to reincorporate. They just aren't.
it's it's a
So,
it's a show don't tell, but it is squared by the
mhm,
fact that we've taken the linear medium of traditional
right.
fiction
Hmm.
and put it into a role-playing space, because by doing that, I've literally stepped on your narrative agency.
Well, more than that. I mean, yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
attempting to treat you
Hmm.
as though you are just fiction and I am the only author here.
Correct. And this is what I actually have a word for this. It's not play.
Hmm.
It's not a style. What you just described, that's not a style. That's the
No,
absence of play. As soon as you
that's
lose the medium of
artlessness.
listening, as soon as you lose the medium of listening, as soon as the reincorporation ceases, you're simply not doing the thing we're talking about. I don't care how long you sit
Yeah,
around the table and roll dice and scritchy scratch numbers. You're not doing the thing we're talking about. So
absolutely.
this is actually a really big deal because I'm okay with playing. Well, I would say not any form of D&D because there are some which I think are absolutely wretched, but lots of forms of D&D. Well, two. There are two forms of D&D that I'm very, very, very eager and happy to do this with because I think the system lends it to it very, very nicely. Even though some other person would go, "Oh, I don't play trad games. I don't play D&D." Well, fuck you. I'm doing the thing with this system, which the way we do it, and it not particularly abusive, not particularly tweaking it, it actually works very nicely for. By the way, those are the Holmes
Sure.
version in 1977 and fourth edition. So the
Yeah, I'm not sure what Holmes edition is.
mhm. I
But me
have a
myself,
diagram.
most of what eventually became my body of role-playing theory actually these thoughts first occurred to me while playing AD&D, and D, and
Yeah.
I think I would consider it edition 0.5,
Mhm.
so the first hardbound sets,
Right.
and began with white box, but immediately graduated to the hardbound books.
Mhm. We'll talk
So I
more
guess
about
that's
D&D
edition
history and how it
oh
plays
05.
into our
My
experience of role playing in a
my
minute.
point being that I agree with you, and I've also recently played just a little bit of 5e, and I enjoyed it. So I think that 0.5 and 5e are both perfectly playable from a narrativist standpoint
Right.
if you want to do it.
Right. Let me point out something that I tweaked me, as long as we're going to talk about these terms, that tweaked me during our previous conversation. As
You don't
I
like the word
defined
narrative.
it, as I defined creative agenda, as I used the
Oh,
term narrativism as an example, this is not identifiable to any specific techniques. When somebody says I
agreed.
play narrative games, I not trad games or some
No,
shit like
no,
that, they're totally they're I might as well be talking to a creationist at that point. I might as well be
I agree.
talking.
There's
It's
no one
right,
way to there's no
right,
one way to be an author. There's no
right,
one way to be an auteur.
right,
In fact, I have a list that I'll send you if you want it of the 4 or 5 different things that may be considered narrativism, but are different skill sets.
right,
And the one that
right.
I
This
focus on,
is
I like to call experientialist. But in fact,
right,
you may be interested in affect, or you may be interested in theme, you may be love narrative arcs, and you always want to do the hero's journey. Those are different approaches,
of
and they're
course.
all narrativist,
Believe
but
me,
they're
I
all
kept
interested
I
in
kept
different
talking
things.
about the fan. In each of the creative agendas, we're talking about a huge multi-fingered fan, like the physical object, the fan,
A
and that we're
wind fan.
not talking about specific sets of technique. The number of people who actually understood that 20 years ago can be numbered, unfortunately, in two hands, two hands worth of fingers.
Still about the same, I
Right.
would agree.
So anyway, what I'm trying to get at here, to get out of this bibble babble and back into the issues of your game, this is where I cannot lead you, but I must instead, hopefully positively, from this experience of enjoying what we just did, I want you to examine the procedures that we followed, especially in terms of dice, especially in terms of probability, especially in terms of um, well, um, the shift of this many numbers to those many numbers. right? The what you might call an operation. I had 0 experience points, now I have 3, is an example. But there are others as well. The translation of and you have it there in your chart, right? It's your effects chart. I beat the roll by 1 or more, or rather, sorry, by 2 or more. I beat the target.
Mhm.
That creates an operation, right, of a certain, the multiplier gets bigger, or however you want to say it in your mind, but there is an operational
Yep.
shift there. So in looking at these things, it is very, very aversive to people to go and say, is it any good? Were the operations that we did actually impacted by those things? Or were they just triggers for other behaviors that are themselves the operations, so that we're playing a fake system on paper and with our numbers and with our dice, while this other system of what is said and what is operative from that is actually occurring,
Well,
which
yeah.
I
I mean,
think
I
is
think that if you
extraordinarily
play,
right. That's very common today in the
it is. Well,
very
again,
common.
if you go back to the old days when we first started experimenting with different ways to play D&D, very often it did have that quality to it where it's almost like I used to play Squad Leader this way too. We would make up backstories for all the dudes in the on the battlefield. So it became this, gut-wrenching drama, right?
Hmm.
Because these are human beings now. We would inject story into the game, and it's possible to do that with most trad systems where you've got the story level, yes, but it's really kind of free floating on top of the
Hmm.
mechanical level.
Exactly.
And
And
I think
so,
that
go ahead.
that's what most people tend to do.
Exactly. Well,
I'm
that's what
I'm
they were
hoping.
trained to do, especially from about 1990 on. In fact, it was
Yeah,
formalized
yeah.
in the early 90s with the White Wolf stuff, but to do that.
Now,
But go ahead.
inspired by mostly by Archipelago, the yes and no but, etc. And the idea that if you want to stay immersed, like every die roll is a cost to me. It feels like
Mhm.
a cost in immersion or something. So I want to make sure that every time you make a die roll, it returns at least as much narrative energy as you had going in, or double,
Absolutely.
right?
No, regardless of the result. And that's why I was a little, I'm not going to say disappointed, because I cared enough about Sammy Ray to be invested in, the successful roles. But from a completely principle based perspective, we
Mhm.
need to talk in your game now. Next time, we need to talk about failed roles. We need to
Mhm.
talk about what this means. Okay? What we just went through in terms of system interaction was very much wandering through a candy store and being able to greedily stuff our face with whatever we felt like. I want
And you rolled well.
I
I
know
mean, you could have
exactly.
rolled badly.
That's what I'm saying. I got some sixes and stuff. I get that. But let's consider, and I don't mean what if. I mean, we may have to play more, right, to actually do this, to encounter
Mm.
genuinely failed roles. Not when I'm saying, well, I want a failed roll here so I can see what Todd says. No, I mean, I'm like, fuck, I failed, right? And we're doing it. Do you see now why I'm so insistent on doing it and not
Sure,
hypothetically kind of doing it, pretending to explain, right? We
sure.
need
But
this.
when I'm writing the book, I need to explain to the person who's going to be doing it, right?
Well, you know
Um,
what? Fortunately, writer Todd with his book is future Todd.
no,
For
I'm doing
purposes
it.
of no, no, you're not. Not as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned in this context, in these consults, writer Todd is some other dude who has some other problem some other day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So if we continue to do a little play and run into some failed roles and see what they mean. You see, failed roles are, of course, outcomes of uncertainty, just like everything else.
Sure,
They
but
turn
here I'm
uncertainty.
sorry. I need the reason I said it is because I need to touch on this. I mean,
Right. Mhm.
I do tell the GM this and
Right.
maybe you
Todd,
want to discount it, but
put it in a note to yourself. If you're talking to about writer Todd, I want you to write it on a sticky note and put it on your desk. I don't want to know. I
But it's
want.
also in my head. No, no,
Mhm,
no. I'm not just writer Todd.
mhm,
I'm also GM Todd who read the book, right? So
mhm,
it's in my head at the moment I'm playing with you.
mhm.
I know, okay, I've internalized this rule and here it is. This is important. It's
Right.
pertinent.
So we're just right. But
Okay.
I just want to
I do
experience it.
not I do not make you roll. I do not ask for a roll. I do not encourage you to suggest a roll. If I can't think of anything that makes narrative sense or
Right.
that we care about, should you fail.
Sure. This
If
is
I
very
cannot
important.
think
I
of any
know.
dramatic stake, should you fail, then there's no point rolling that.
No,
And
I
I
completely
don't.
agree.
We
Let
just
me put it in the language that makes the most sense to me that may help
okay.
you in this regard. And you're saying, well, I don't need help. Maybe you don't, but let's really
No,
bring
no,
it
no.
out,
You know what I
right?
need?
Mhm.
I do need help with the language of it.
Sure.
So I do want to hear
So
it.
here's what, remember what I talked about with uncertainty? We don't know what
Yeah.
is like up on the ceiling. We don't know, what is here or there. We don't know whether I'm going to live through this fight or not. Things we don't know when we're dealing with these fictional components. At that
Uh,
point, there may be asymmetry of information, and there is certainly asymmetry of what I call authorities, which we may have to delve into later. It's a positive word. Okay, I do not mean taking over play. Um,
uh,
it's just what I get to talk about and what you get to talk about, or what I get to
yeah, yeah.
confirm when you talk about it, or you get to confirm when I talk about
Yeah, I
it, right?
literally say narrative control, even though that might be
It's the
too
worst word,
egregious
Todd.
of a term.
Worst word possible.
Yeah.
Worst word. It's like
uh,
it's like saying control right there. That's the worst word. It's exactly what we're not talking
yeah,
about. So if
yeah.
we do this, right?
It's
Um,
kind of like walking into the room with your dick out.
I know exactly. It's like nobody's listening to what you're saying anymore at all. Yeah. So the completely exactly. So what I'm saying here is that if we are examining this situation of play, and we do have asymmetry of different things, which is a good thing. It's like having different instruments in a band, for God's sake. um, we have this asymmetry of information, asymmetry of functionality,
Yeah.
but they have to intersect with each other or else we're not playing. So we do this,
Uh-huh.
and now uncertainty has become certainty in a variety of ways. It is a certainty that my character doesn't understand that thing. It has become a certainty that I have not, managed to bring off that contractual language, and then that means that, Bleedo's going to come down on me like a ton of bricks, right? It's now what was, even if they're so-called failed rolls, they are
Right.
space shapers. They are. Remember, I talked about the big changes. We can talk about changes within a scene and then punching the difference between this scene and the next scene, right? Those changes of the moments of play. And that's what I want to focus on. That's where the authenticity of the system is or is not present in action. And I know lots of people who will blither for hours about their system and about their this and that. And then we play, and I realize that it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's just busyness for me to do while they do their notion of story guiding or whatever it is they think they're doing. So, and then
Uh,
I'm me. I mean, you just watch me play. What do you think a person like that thinks of playing with me? They're going to hate my
you
guts.
know,
They're going to hate my guts. They're
you,
going to,
you
I'm disruptive. I'm causing trouble. I'm just an attention hog. I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other.